Welcome to Toasting the Classics Special Edition Sober Shorts. We will not be drinking today, but we are still going to be taking something that people call a classic and we're going to pass judgment upon it. I have welcomed into the virtual studio Mr.
Bill Hodges.
Welcome back, Mr. Bill. We're going to talk about a book today. It's the first time we've done that on Sober Shorts. I feel like a book usually warrants a full hour discussion, but you know what? We're going to try to do it anyway. So, what do we read?
We read Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama.
I just thought this was a cool concept when I heard about the book a little while back, so I put it on my reading list, read it, and I was thinking, hey, why don't we talk about this one? This would be a good time. So, how about you? Had you heard of this one or experienced this
I
in any way?
I had not, and so it was interesting. I did kind of a fairly lengthy deep dive on it and thought, it is a really cool concept, and it's something that actually, like at least in part, how the book started out with this asteroid hitting the Earth in the near coming future. I mean,
Did you catch the date?
it was 2077.
The date that the asteroid hits the Earth is September 11th, 2077.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I mean, it's just random, but that's pretty weird.
And I'm curious, because Clarke was kind of like anti-capitalist, and there was the whole, I mean, that was not long after, or maybe it was a little time before the Chilean coup, which also happened to be on September 11th.
Oh, was it? I
Um,
didn't know that.
yeah, so in fact that there's conspiracies abound around how
I can't see there being any connection between the Taliban and the Chilean Pinochet. That doesn't make any sense to
Pinochet,
me.
no,
Yeah. I do know that I believe the British burnt DC on September 11th back in what would that be? 1813,
18,
I think.
18,
It's in
yeah.
the War of 1812, but I don't remember which year. And then I know that ground was broken on the Pentagon on September 11th.
Oh, interesting.
So that
Huh,
that actually seems kind of relevant because anyway, we're getting off on a tangent. We don't want to get too
a
many
little bit.
conspiracy theory people calling us up. And although you know what, send us emails. Download the podcast if you're a conspiracy nut. Please listen, send us emails. I'll be happy to talk to all of you. It sounds like we need a little bit of a synopsis. What is this book about? What's the basics of it?
Basically there's this huge, what is it, like 16 kilometer by 50 kilometer asteroid that comes from outside our solar system.
Well, first they just noticed there's something coming
There's
in from
something.
outside the solar system, right?
This is after this asteroid hits planet Earth, so they set up this whole satellite,
Right,
like
right.
warning,
Yeah.
this whole NEO system for watch guarding. And actually, I think it's interesting because NASA and Congress actually established a project with the same name, Project Space Guard.
Is it called that? I know we have I know
Well,
there's
there's
an
several
office.
now. There are multiple
Okay,
programs
because
out there that are watching.
that's not the name of the agency that I know it as, and I can't remember what it is, but it sounds super cool. It's like protecting the Earth from disasters or something. It's like a really cool sounding name that the program has that looks for asteroids. But the thing about that is that the idea that we would need a specialized service to detect something of the dimensions of what Rama ends up being, we would detect that. You would detect that, like Umwauwau, the thing that came in from another solar system a
Hmm.
few years back,
Hmm.
is significantly smaller than what Rama is. We can detect that. We're worried about detecting things that are like 5 kilometers wide or 2 kilometers wide or something. I think something this size you would definitely know was coming. Although you need to know it's coming pretty early if it's this big, I guess. But
Well, the asteroid that destroyed the dinosaurs is only about 6 miles wide,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. So you don't need anything anywhere near as big as Rama to do damage to the Earth. Although that would not be like a complete killer. But anyway, the point is when they talk about the asteroid that hit Italy in 2077, that's why they set up the space guard and that's why they detect Rama. That's really just sort of the background to it.
That's right.
Um, Clarke is pretty big on giving you lots of background details. It's maybe like a criticism of his writing. He's a little tell instead of show a lot of the time. I think this is interesting enough. I like the story enough. It didn't really bother me.
Not to too much of a degree,
But
although I mean,
basically, they have these guys that go around the solar system. They're sort of like a merchant marine. They're doing all kinds of missions around the solar system. So they task one of these ships to go and check out this body and see what it is,
the
which is kind of
Endeavor.
cool when you think about it, because apparently in this world, this is like the 22nd century, but it's still not easy to send spaceships around the solar system. You definitely, and I think that's probably pretty realistic. 200 years from now, it probably still won't be that easy. Oh, and this is, I guess, 100 years from now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
about that.
21, 30.
Little
Yeah.
more than that. Yeah.
100 years from now, I don't think we're going to be able to just jet around the solar system and go wherever we want. I think you're still going to be talking about, oh, we need to have a plan to get to this place in months and stuff like that. Like whatever assets are in place is what you can get there. So this guy with his crew on a ship called the Endeavor go to check out the Rama, and the book is essentially them exploring the interior of this vessel. It becomes obvious that it's been sent from, first of all, they know it's come from another solar system because of its trajectory, which is the same thing in real life when they detected Umwamwa, which they considered naming Rama, actually, because of the same
Hmm.
kind of a story. You could tell by its trajectory and the way it was accelerating and stuff that it was not something that was gravitationally bound to the sun and was moving at the wrong velocity to be orbiting the sun, which is really cool. And that's 2017. That's the first time anybody ever detected something like that. And it's been seen a
Hmm.
couple times since, actually. Anyway, so they know that, but it becomes pretty obvious when they get a good look at it. I can't, do they see it before they arrive that it's, I was going to say man-made, it's not man-made, but artificial.
Sort of, and there's a lot of uncertainty around it, I believe.
Its
And
shape
so
is
the closer they get to it, the more they realize that it was probably artificial.
right.
And then as they get inside this thing, they're able to land on it, which kind of makes me think of Armageddon, right?
Yeah.
But here they like actually open up this door
Yeah,
that
they
then
find
they
an
go
airlock.
down into. They find an airlock and they're like, okay, this is definitely artificially made, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think at that
Um,
point they realize that something is up. Yeah. It's kind of cool because in actuality, even now in 2025, we've sent multiple missions to go land on asteroids. All of that is possible with 21st century technology.
not manned program, like
No, not
manned
manned. Well, we basically don't do manned because we don't have to now. I think people in Arthur Clarke's day, they just didn't understand the idea that you wouldn't need it. You'd be sending. I don't really envision a whole lot of manned space flight happening in the near future because it's so expensive and you could just send drones and robots and things like that and you get just as
Yeah.
much information. There's really not a lot of advantage to having to deal with life support and things like that, or the potential loss of life if somebody is killed doing it or rescuing them or things like
Well, and
that.
part of this too, I think, was that humanity had populated a number of different asteroids out in the
Yeah, they're
outer
all
belt
over,
and
right?
Mars and
Yeah.
Mercury somehow, which gets into the
Mercury, I don't know
story,
how anybody's living in. I mean, this is 1973, so they've got pretty good information already that like
right?
Mars is not inhabitable, that Venus is not someplace you can live, and yet he's got people on definitely Mercury, Mars, the moon. The moon is close enough that I feel like people could live there with some kind of support, but it's kind of a stretch to think of people living on Mercury or any kind of society on Mercury anytime.
Mercury's certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, Mars is, I mean, there's a lot of discussion around it, right? But
Yeah,
um,
but anytime soon and any kind of substantial like cities and colonies on Mars by 2134, I just don't see that happening. But
it's not self-contained, right?
no,
It's
oh,
gonna have to
definitely not
be
self-contained. Yeah. He's got people living on the moons. He said there are people living on the moons of Neptune, but for some reason not Uranus. I don't know why that would be. I don't know what's wrong with the moons of Uranus compared to the moons of Saturn or any place else, but
Well, I
he
thought
left
didn't
that
they
one out.
mention Titus?
Titan's a moon of Saturn, yeah. But
Yeah,
they
but
did,
and
but he
it
specifically said nobody lives on the moons of Uranus, and I was like, why? Could you explain that? I guess maybe other readers wouldn't care, but I'm like, what's wrong with Uranus? Like, I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it's slightly colder than Saturn, but I mean, Saturn's pretty cold, so I don't know if it matters.
so they go down inside, right?
So they go
They get
inside,
inside.
right? How did you do with the layout of Rama in your head? How was your mind's eye doing?
It was a little abstract, and I struggled with it
Yeah.
because he starts going into how there's like a south and a north.
Uh-huh.
It's like, okay, well, directionally, how does that work out?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
It,
what is
it,
north? What are when we're talking about? We're in
so
space. What is north? What is south?
I honestly, while trying to maintain the narrative in my head, I just couldn't wrap my head around any of that. But when I read afterwards, I realized what he's saying is you've got a rotating body, right? That's how they generate the gravity. So
Right?
the interior of the rotating body is where everybody is actually walking because it's generating gravity and you're pulled out by centripetal force, or the opposite of centripetal force. So when he says north and south, he's talking about it's rotating just like you'd imagine the Earth, and the North Pole is the one that's on the end in the direction it's traveling, and the South Pole is where is where the engines are. So if you picture it that way, the direction it's traveling in is north, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, does not really it doesn't really map to how the earth moves, but anyway, that's what he's talking about. I didn't get that while I was reading the book, to be perfectly honest. And I was picturing everything completely wrong. I knew I was picturing everything completely wrong, but I just had to get my head around the geography somehow to understand the story at all. So I just went ahead and was wrong, and I knew I was wrong. Actually, when I looked it up today, there was an artist's conception on the cover of one of the books.
Mm, hmm
And as
hmm
soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, got it. Okay, now I get it. I could go back and read the book now and I'd know what was happening a lot better. It was difficult to get from his prose, let's just say.
I had just kind of put it to the side,
Exactly. Exactly. I think
right?
you just had to get over it and move on. But I knew he had an idea. I know he's the kind of person he knows what he's talking about, but our minds weren't meeting, if you know what I mean. And to me, that means the writer is kind of failing at his job a little bit. But yeah, so we are talking about the way the solar system is set up. Did that remind you of anything?
Like what? What do you mean?
Like the way they talk about the solar system and like how there's different personalities to each of the different planets and there's like colonies on each of them and it's pretty well developed and the way space travel seems to operate, which is like better than today but still at similar speeds. It's totally seems like the Expanse to me.
Oh, okay.
I think this conception of how the near future space travel environment would operate is exactly what's going on in the Expanse. Like maybe even the Expanse is kind of inspired by the work of Arthur C. Clarke to some extent.
I could see that.
They tend to get their science right in a way that a lot of narrative-driven sci-fi usually just brushes that aside. But I think that they're doing a pretty good job of it in The Expanse, and I think this was like it.
Have you read those?
Also, I read the first couple, and then it's one of those things that I liked it perfectly fine, but I just kind of dropped the ball and didn't keep the series going for some reason. I think I read the first two, and I thought
Okay.
they were cool, but it was starting to get repetitive, maybe. I thought
Hmm.
as I got into this. Didn't you read those? I
I
thought
read all of them. Yeah, I
yeah,
read all of
yeah,
those.
okay. But the one thing, speaking of the show, the one thing that really reminded me of it, and I think Arthur C. Clarke was heavily influenced by, is Lovecraft, because
Hmm.
this was a lot like the Mountains of Madness. It was a
Oh, okay.
lot of the same kind of language. And when he's describing the big buildings and stuff, it's just like in the Mountains of Madness when they go to Antarctica, they discover the ancient city from an alien civilization. Although in that, I think the aliens are more explicit. We never really find out anything about the aliens in this.
We're introduced to them. We meet them.
Do we?
Sort of.
We meet
We
their
meet their
cyborg creatures.
their
Biots.
biobots.
Biots.
Biots.
Yeah.
Biots, yes.
So a biot in this world is kind of an autonomous, like a droid, basically, but it has organic components. And so he's trying to coin a word biot. And so I looked it up and I was thinking, I guess I would call that a cyborg organism or a cybernetic organism. And I looked at it and the word cyborg existed. It was coined in 1960, but I'm
Hmm.
thinking Arthur C. Clarke was trying to
Come up
recoin
with
and
his
like come
own,
up with a better word. It
which
just doesn't
and it never stuck.
it doesn't really have a great ring to it. Biot. Cyborg is a pretty cool sounding word, I have to say. What did you think of this one?
Parts of it were interesting. You know, when the character Jimmy starts his little traverse to the south, and it's interesting they've named like these structures after large cities
Right. So
in
it's like New
on
York,
Earth.
London, Moscow, whatever,
Right,
Tokyo,
right, Paris.
Paris, right.
And so they start making their way. This guy Jimmy, who's one of the kind of the young upcoming member of this crew, decides he tells the commander that, oh well, as it happens, I kind of smuggled a flying bicycle on board. He's an Olympic cyclist of these flying bikes. And I'm like, okay, that's fun. Kind of cool conceptually. So this guy's going to take this thing and he's going to fly over to where he needs to get to.
This is the part you
Over
liked of the book.
description. This is a part of the book that I like. I think some of it was a little overly verbose. Like there's just some.
I think it had the most human interest, right?
I think that's right.
I think
I
there's
think
all
that's
kinds
right.
of great, interesting background stuff. This concept of this book is really cool, but there's not a lot of, I mean, there's even sort of a romance potential between him and the doctor who is described. I read a little bit about Arthur C. Clarke, and I think this makes more sense in hindsight. But the woman is described as if someone has read books about women and really has no personal experience of what a woman is. It's very weird and strange. It's like talking about it may have something to do with Arthur C. Clarke's deep and abiding homosexuality throughout his life. He really didn't
Right.
have much interest in women as human beings.
I mean, I think that the big three that he's a part of kind of are all a little bit guilty of that in some way. Not necessarily
Well, there's
in
a couple of like flight attendants in 2001, right? Like that's it. And that's in the film. They might
yeah.
not even be in the book. I don't remember if I've read 2001. I kind of think I did.
I
But
did. I read 2001, I read 2010, I read 2061, and then there's also like a 3001 then,
yeah.
and at that point I was like, okay, that's
What do you consider the three of his books? I mean, I really just 2001 and Rama. What else is there?
oh, you mean for Clark's books
Yeah.
in general?
Yeah, you were saying his big three.
Well, when I'm talking about referring to the big three, I mean the writers. I'm talking about Clarke, I'm talking about
Oh,
Heinlein, and I'm
oh.
talking about
Yeah,
Asimov.
well, at first I just thought it was 1950s misogyny, right? You're just clueless about women. Like, first of all, it's the 50s and everybody's a misogynist. And then on top of it, you're a gigantic nerd. And so you really don't understand. Like, the women in Robert Heinlein's books are objects for people to look at their boobs. That's what they exist for. And like every once in a while, a woman is allowed to walk on screen so that people can look at her boobs or something. And that's what I thought was going on here. I think this was even worse because I think he felt like he needed someone for the readers to fantasize about, but he just was not interested in this character at all.
Well,
So,
and I was like, I kind of got excited for a quick minute, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Here's a female character. Maybe
right.
she's going to be like a primary character, and there's going to be some actual, like,
I mean, she's just I
character
mean, honestly,
development here.
none of the characters are very well developed. She's really
No, they
just,
aren't.
like you said, Jimmy gets a nice long bit. And I actually was concerned about whether or not he survived his crash because
Yeah,
he actually did a very effective, like a cliffhanger at the
he
end of
did.
one
Yeah,
chapter. And then,
right.
and then the guy had survived. And I was like, okay, that was probably the most interesting part of the book. But yeah, character's not what we're into this for. That's
There's the piece with Jimmy getting himself to New York and introducing the crab creature. All of a sudden, and that's like our introduction to, okay, here's this clearly like there are these biotic creatures that have been left here for a variety of different purposes. They're
right.
maintaining this enormous structure, and we don't get a whole lot more than that.
No.
But the idea of like a generational ship, which is kind of where my head went a little bit with this, was like, okay, so you're another species and you're trying to leave your solar system and
So
get somewhere else. He goes into in a decent amount of depth regarding like the inability to really get to light speed, and so it's going to take a long, long time to get from one place to another. So you have this generational craft.
So I don't know if generational is the right way to think of it and I don't think it's given away in this book. So I think I'm reading in, and I actually want to ask you what you think about the concept of the sequels in a little bit, but maybe all this is explained in the sequels and I'm just being dumb. But there's this one quote, and I wrote it down. He said, "Even at absolute zero, residual quantum effects eventually erase too much cellular information to make revival possible." So he's basically saying that you cannot have like hibernation
That
because this is a ship that's traveling. I don't think it's traveling from solar system to solar system. I think it's traveling intergalactically. So we're talking about millions of years that it's traveling for. And if you have a body, no matter what he's saying is that at the cellular level, little changes in the quantum state of your cells is just going to make you not you. So there's just no point in trying to do it. So I believe what it is he's got like a primordial soup in that ocean, and
hmm
it's designed to actually like recreate the life from like an
hmm
evolutionary process from that soup of organic molecules. So that's a pretty cool concept. I'm all on board for that. That's neat. I like that idea. And I think it kind of makes some sense. I like the way he's thinking about deep time combined with space. Again, that's Lovecraft. Lovecraft, one of the big things that he's doing in his stories is making horror out of deep time, which is pretty cool. But I think that's kind of what he's going with the traveling. Did you feel like it was coming from another galaxy?
Somewhere. I thought there was some description of like the possibility of it coming from a particular and them being able to in some way identify like what
I
star
thought there
system
was
that
too,
it
but I couldn't
necessarily come.
remember. I couldn't
Yeah,
remember where. At the end, it says it's heading towards the Large Magellanic Cloud. So that's an intergalactic trip. But I couldn't
right.
remember whether they had talked about where it came from in the story. But well, I mean, we've been talking for a good amount of time already. It's probably time to start passing judgment. Did anything surprise you about this? I mean, did you have any idea what this was to be surprised?
I kind of just felt like they were like, okay, well, so we were able to stop the nuclear
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
missile from the
Yeah.
Hermians,
Why did they
who
do
sent
that? I guess they were worried. They were worried it was headed towards their area.
that was like so the interplanetary body of people who were like
Right.
decision-making body were like, well, we don't want this thing to like destroy a planet or turn into some extra planetary location that's going to somehow interfere with everything else.
The United Planets organization where everybody is named Smith or Jones or some very Anglo name. Like it doesn't even sound like the United Nations, much less the United Planets. But
Right,
you know,
right. So someone on Mercury is like, okay, so we got to blow this thing up. And Endeavor's like, we're not going to let that happen because we don't want to die. They go and they stop it from happening, and that was kind of the end of it. And it was like it was getting ready. It was going to start speeding up,
yes, it was
and
going to go into like perihelion and pick up velocity as it
pick up
slingshots
velocity.
past the sun,
Right.
basically.
All of these concerns were out the window, out the door, and that was kind of it.
That was a ball he threw up in the air and just let it hit the ground. Like I thought that whole, oh, and then they stopped the nuclear bomb, and I'm like, was that what passes for tension in this novel? That really was not that. Maybe in a film that could have been interesting. Oh, speaking of which, I wanted to mention that apparently there's the same guy who did Dune, Denis Villeneuve, is apparently doing this. This is supposed to come out pretty soon as a movie in the next couple of years. He's working on the script.
Ah,
Although
okay.
it's been in development hell for I think like two
For a
decades.
really long time. I know
So
Morgan Freeman, I
Morgan
guess, was
Freeman apparently really wanted to do it. That's random and cool. It makes me think
yeah.
good things about Morgan Freeman that he would be interested in this project. Speaking of being interested in this project, what do you think?
I liked it. I thought it had a lot of interesting elements to it. I think the idea of the possibility of life starting from somewhere else on an asteroid and then coming to Earth. I mean, who knows? It just brings up a lot of really cool like evolutionary ideas. It brings up a lot of like natural selection ideas.
Yeah. To me, if you're doing an even sort of realistic study of humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life, I'm
Yeah.
on. Like
Yeah.
Contact 2001, I'm interested in that. I'm gonna pay attention to that. That's if it's done even sort of well. It's an interesting concept that fascinates me. And I thought this was cool, even though I didn't think he landed the plane terribly well in terms of writing. I was thinking about this actually. This reminds me of talking to you about something before, because I was thinking I would have thought that this was a really poorly written book, and then I was comparing it to The Three Body Problem, and I was like, no, there's worse books out there. Like that one is written even worse than this one is written. And I don't think the concept is as interesting. That book, I think, failed two times in trying to be. This one at least gets the concept right, I thought. I think a test for whether we would toast this is would you be interested in reading the sequels?
I got them. I bought it all
Oh,
as
so you are
one
so you were
set.
interested.
So
Oh, okay.
I'm planning on it. The second one, Rama 2, is like twice the length of this one, so it'll
This was
take me
very
some time.
short, by the way, for the listeners. If
Yeah.
anybody's thinking about reading this, this is a pretty breezy read. So
Yeah, it was like 260 or so
yeah,
pages.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
it's it's in the tradition of something like Starship Troopers or Red Planet or something. When one of these sort of older sci-fi books, it's really like a quick read. Although I think Heinlein writes action a lot better.
I think that's right.
So I mean, I think he's
Um,
he's he's more readable in that sense.
I think in terms of Clark's contribution to like the sci-fi and genre of like the idea of hey, like humanity is going to be getting ourselves out there into the larger solar system at least
Hmm.
sometime, probably
Yeah,
potentially necessary to do so, at least to the moon, right? And
yeah.
establishing something there and having that whole body.
In a technological sense, yes, but in terms of environmental catastrophe, I'm with Neil deGrasse Tyson. There's nothing you could do technologically to make the moon inhabitable that wouldn't be cheaper and easier to just fix the Earth.
Just fix the Earth.
You
Yeah,
know,
you're
like I
probably
mean,
right.
not
Yeah.
that I'm not saying it'd be easy to fix the Earth, but it's easier than living on the moon or Mars, is all I'm saying. So what do you think? You toast?
I would toast this. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think for the reason of it introduces a lot of really interesting ideas to the genre, and so I liked it. I mean, I agree some of the writing isn't the best.
It's okay. It's a
I
workmanlike
think
job of writing. Gets the
I
job
think that's right. I think that's the case for Asimov. I think that's the case for Clarke. I think that's the case for, you know, a
done.
few of our earlier, you know,
Similar. Similar
sci-fi
problems to
writers.
Asimov, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
very similar. Although I think Asimov actually, amazingly, I think it's possible to say Asimov draws his characters a little better. I mean, I think Asimov is way at the bottom of the spectrum in ability to draw a character. I think these are worse.
I mean,
Anyway,
we see examples with the Expanse, the character development are what really make those novels great. Whereas this is more just kind of introducing
sure.
these concepts that later authors, I think, have been able to
But I think The
adapt.
Expanse as I can't remember, I think it's Newton, he said, if I have seen farther than others, it is because I stood on the shoulders of giants. I think The Expanse is
That's right.
better because they're just taking the work that's been done by other authors in terms of the setting, and then they write some good characters in that setting. And I think that, and the action is better, and the actual writing is better.
That's I think the contribution
Yes.
of
Yeah.
Clarke and
Agree. I agree.
Asimov.
I agree. The
And
setting and
th
the science and stuff like that. Yeah. Just the idea. I mean, obviously, I don't know if an alien civilization sending an artifact into ours, it's kind of an obsession of Clark's, right? That's kind of going on in all of his writing. I don't know if it's an original idea to his, but he's certainly the biggest popularizer of the idea. I like it. I toast. I think this is a fun read. I think this was interesting. I would say grab it.
yeah,
This is Dave McArthur, and I am certifying Rendezvous with Rama as a classic.
Bill Hodges, I agree. I'm on board. It was a good, quick read that's worthwhile.
Agreed. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Peace out.
Thanks for having me.